Good morning or afternoon, players, gamers, and critters! My name is Master Mimic, and welcome back to Roaring D20s, my little show where I sit here and talk about everything D&D related. So, last episode I talked about player creation and all the pitfalls that come with it if you don't know exactly what you're doing. So, I thought that I would, take a walk on the positive side and talk about my top 5 favorite player characters. Now, because I don't want to just sit here stroking my own ego, I thought I'd talk about player characters that I have encountered during my time as a GM. Now, these guys were essentially, as soon as the player told me who they were, their name, their concept, I just went, awesome, with a big smile on my face. Quick little note here, most of these characters came from Pathfinder, so I'll be sure to explain things if the race does not sound familiar to those who maybe strictly Dungeons and Dragons or otherwise. So, let's get started with number 5. Coming from my evil game comes Ordis Gunmar the Godslayer. He is a Gripply gunslinger who has a penchant for mischief and is honestly underappreciated by almost everybody in his party. For those who don't know what a Gripply is, so Gripplies are essentially frog people. As a result of this, Ordis naturally is able to secrete poison, which he has used to annoying effect, in a good way. But it is his armaments and his skill as a gunslinger that puts him at number 5 on this list. Gunslingers tend to have a difficulty in battle because their class has a huge focus on firearms, which in Pathfinder, and well, if Critical Role is of any consolation with Percival, guns kind of have this thing where sometimes they misfire, and then the game requires you to spend a round or so trying to clear the jam. So essentially, it is as if your barbarian sword broke on every critical fail. So every now and then this will keep Ordis from really rising to greatness, but Ordis has gone around this by literally having a bag of holding that he fills with nothing but guns, and it is awesome. Essentially, if he needs his revolvers, well, they're right there on his holsters. He has no problem. He needs to draw his triple-barrel sawed-off shotgun that blasts dragonfire with its shells. He reaches into his bag. He needs to grab his long-range rifle that he one time pulverized an elf's head off its shoulders from 5 miles away. He'll reach into his bag. This character, honestly, every time my player sits down to play as him, I just sit there with a smile because I know it's going to be so freaking cool. So, moving on. So we're going to focus on Markria, who is also a member of that evil campaign of mine. Markria is a recent addition. She joined in with her player, Forrest Spartan. So FS was able to have a lot of fun with Markria because he essentially told me that her backstory was she was a tiefling who was born directly from a demon from the Inferno. So this demon had been imprisoned in the Inferno and was doing everything in her power to escape and walk the mortal realm again. So she sends her daughter, Markria, to the mortal realm to secure her passage. To do so, she needs to hunt down and slay her father, and he's going to be a difficult one for her to get. But that's honestly what makes this character so great, is that she has this patronage from her mother, and her mother was revealed that she can alter fate. That was kind of her ability, or at least alter fate in a negative way. So essentially she was a demon lord of misfortune. With Markria, she can briefly tap into those abilities inherently, but also can use her mother's influence to, essentially, she can re-roll a roll of hers or force me to roll again at disadvantage. It's honestly really, really cool. And recently, she ended up getting a follower, a orc named Jargul, who was the first, I guess, friend that she had ever really had. She essentially found this guy's companionship to be, irreplaceable. He was her bestie, and she had all her life had only known the treacherousness of demon kind, and so having a companion with her who was not constantly trying to stab her in the back or one-up her, she found genuine friendship in this character. And unfortunately, during a battle, another player had instigated this huge conflict with a banshee whose wail ended up dealing, I think it was like 100 damage, And unfortunately, Jargul only had about 10 HP left. So he perished, although Markria was able to convince her mother to essentially reverse fate and allow him to come back, albeit an orc who now had ties with the Inferno. She still now has this burning hatred, no pun intended, for this particular player. So as a result of this, not only did she decree that once she sees an advantage, she will do everything in her power to destroy him, but she even went so far as to join the big bad of this game to ultimately destroy him. Things have since fallen into place. There is still this ever-present tension between the two characters, but what makes it really exciting for me as a GM is just seeing where this conflict is going to go. Markria, obviously, being a fiery demoness, she's very impulsive, and she's very quick to anger, but she's also tactical and doing everything she can to not only survive, but basically to enjoy the life she's been given, even if that means going with the dark side, because after all, she was born of it. Moving on to our number 3 spot, going over to my Star Wars game, my very first adventure I ever played as a GM, and therefore this character has a particular soft spot in my heart, Mozga Dardas. Mozga, or Mose as we tended to call him, was a Nelvanian. If those non-Star Wars fans out there, Nelvanians were an alien race found in the unfortunately now non-canonical Clone Wars cartoon made by animator Gendy Tartakovsky, the guy who did Samurai Jack and Dexter's Lab, and basically every awesome cartoon that's come out since, including Hotel Transylvania. Anyway, so the Nelvanians were essentially like blue dog people who were tribal and were very much in tune with the Force, where they almost viewed it as like a god almost. When Graveyard Picnic first approached me and said, "Hey, I want my character to be a Nelvanian," essentially we just rolled with it. I forget exactly. I think we used a form of stats used for Bothans that are found in the game. Like, essentially, we made him the same general idea of a Bothan, except he was stronger and, I think, smarter? I forget. Again, this was my very first ever game I ran as a GM, so forgive me if I'm a little fleety with the details. So, with Mozga, his idea was that in this campaign, it's based on this alternate history. I won't go too much into it because I think that will take basically most of the episode. Mozga ended up joining up with a spacefaring captain, essentially like a Han Solo type, and he wanted to go out and see the galaxy, and that's what happened. So Mozga eventually discovered he had an innate ability for tinkering, so he enjoyed making his own weapons, making his own armor. He loved, looking at the inner mechanisms of ships and droids and stuff like that. Like, it was really fascinating. And Mozga ended up being kind of like, he was soft-spoken, but he had a good heart. He would never be the aggressor. He was always on the defense. He always reacted to how events went. And ultimately, throughout this campaign, he got into a battle with a Jedi and ended up losing one of his arms. I believe it was his left arm. Now, most people would say, well, he's just going to get a replacement arm like Luke did. And you're right. Except Mozga is a little different. Mozga, whose ingenuity, despite being so vast and great, especially compared to people of his tribe, he is still, deep down, still tribal. So his arm still had this kind of metallic look to it. It did not look nearly as, perfect as Luke's replacement arm. But this arm of his, not only did it look very tribal, not only did it look really cool, especially in the sketches that he showed me, but he also described that he had a grappling hook in it. So if he was ever falling from a great distance, or they needed to, climb a sheer cliff, he could just fire it out of his arm and they could climb up. The grappling hook of this, though, was also manufactured into a spear. So essentially he could fire a spear out of his hand that could attach to the end of a cliff and they could walk up. Or even better, he could use this spear in combat, but since it had a chain attached to it, he could just pull it back and bring it into his hand again. So as a result, Mozga quickly became much more versatile as a character, and he was able to be not only on the front line, but he could also hang back and use his weapons to assist from afar. And as a result, Mozga just genuinely became almost the heart of this party, and it was a lot of fun, especially as a first GM, to have this character be a part of the game. It seemed like it was wonderful because I would throw things at them and then just kind of be smirking as I wondered, how is Mozga going to respond to this, And when that happens, when you're a GM, that is a fantastic place to be. Let's see, moving on to number 2 is, obviously, this character is pretty close to my heart, given that she belongs to my beloved little baddie. It is Sindel. Sindel is a changeling. By Pathfinder standards, that means she is the daughter of a hag, or a witch, and a normal human person. Changelings are described as they all have different abilities depending on what kind of hag was their mother. For Sindel, she was born of a green hag. Therefore, as a green changeling, ironically, despite the fact that green hags are supposed to be hideous looking, green changelings are actually described as being one of the most beautiful and almost, what's that term? Mystifying in their beauty. They get very high charisma, they get high intelligence, and basically they use their charms to lull people into a sense of security before ripping it away from them. Well, depending on their character, which by Sindel's character, she definitely would do that. Sindel was I believe she was a shaman. In this class, essentially, a shaman is a clerical type character who has access to more druidic abilities. I believe, I'm so sorry if I'm getting that wrong. I haven't had a shaman in my party in a long time, but essentially what this meant is that she had a spirit animal, which she chose to have a spirit of battle that took the form of a thrush. So what a spirit of battle does is it allows her to buff and debuff at her leisure. So she can buff her allies and hurt her enemies by sapping away their abilities. Now, spirit animals are important because they can not only move unseen, they are naturally invisible given that they're spirits, but they can also use abilities that they can use spells that normally would require a touch attack to do. So essentially, Sindel, if she wanted to curse somebody, she could send her thrush across the battlefield and bink, alright, roll a will save, up, you failed, you're cursed, But that's not what makes Sindel so great. Sindel was part of the party. If anyone saw my last episode, I mentioned a character named Asher, who was essentially the unwitting avatar for the god of undeath. Sindel had fallen in love with him because not only did he have a natural resistance to her charms, given that he is the unfortunate avatar of the undead god, but also he had the same kind of vindictive, bitterness that she had for the world. And together they sort of became like an evil power couple. So together they, she wouldn't help him and he would defend her to the best of his abilities. And she was the reason why he was so determined to be freed of this deity's influence, because he did want to just start a normal life with Sindel, which was unfortunately cruelly taken away from him by another player. So what makes Sindel number 2, though? I mean, that's great and all, but I mean, Mozga Dardos was the first great character I ever had as a GM. And Markria had a really deep, intense backstory, and Ortis was just so lovably diverse and mischievous. I mean, what makes Sindel so superior? Well, it's because Sindel and Little Baddie, by extension, brought an entire country to its knees simply so she could satisfy her revenge against a single player's character. Yes, she essentially usurped the throne of an entire country so she could gain access to its vast armies and vast resources so she can launch a campaign to destroy this one player. And as a GM, I freaking loved every single second of it. And in fact, to this day, her lineage still rules over this nation and is actually considered as, like, more or less the new royal family. It is honestly, like, fantastic. Because effectively, Sindel was the first player character who had major world-changing tendencies, essentially, is what I'm going for. She allowed me, as a GM, to explore world building and allowed me to alter the history of the realm simply based off her decisions. And it is just simply, I love every single moment of this. And it's just, wow. This was a fantastic character, and she essentially altered the entire scope of history within this realm. And, I mean, as a GM, what more can you ever want, you know? When a player's decision has that powerful, not just consequences, but consequences for both themselves, for others, and an entire country. Alright, so, who can possibly top Sindel? Who out there can embody both the resourcefulness of Ortis, the epic backstory of Markria, the smile-inducing nature of Mozga Dardas, and also the world-changing aspects of Sindel? Well, I can think none other than the character known as the Vondrasul in my evil game again. His name roughly is Norwegian for walking hunger. When he was first pitched to me by Graveyard Picnic, it essentially went as such. I want to play an undead werebear barbarian. And I just said, abso-freaking-lutely. You might have noticed that I also mentioned Mozga's Mozga's player was also Graveyard Picnic. So, well, good on you, man, to keep with that tradition. But what I absolutely love about Vondrasul is that he is very, he has a lot of Mary Shelley-isms to him. For example, his story is he was the head of this great werebear clan that, has gone on to being one of the most prosperous and powerful in this nation's history. But then one day, he is betrayed by his brother, who sells him out to a necromancer, who not only kills said brother, but also mortally wounds the Vondrasul. Soon after, she raises him from the dead, but as a unique type of undead. She essentially wanted to create an undead with full cognitive ability left, full memory intact. And at first she thought she had failed with him, because when he came to, she unleashed him on his own village, and then watched as he massacred all of his friends and family, including his dear wife. The process that his creator initially wrote off as a failure and departed. Little did she realize that the Vondrasul had a lot more going for him than meets the eye. For example, the Vondrasul, when he is deprived of meat, he is a savage beast. He is essentially exactly what you imagine an undead bear would be like. Gnawing, tearing, snarling, just tearing apart a screaming victim as they watch their own guts being ripped out of their bellies by this thing's jaws. But then once he's eaten, he regains that same cognitive function that she was hoping for. Essentially, when he comes to, he develops a moral compass. So, essentially, Graveyard Picnic told me his goal as a character is to find his soul, therefore resurrect himself as the man he was, and then he wants to die, because he knows deep down that what he has done is irredeemable. He has done too many terrible things to too many people that he just simply needs to die. But he doesn't want to die as the monster he is. He wants to die as the man that he was. And so he joins up with this evil party, initially simply as a essentially the Hulk of their Avengers, smashing, tearing, ripping, biting everything in sight. But as the game progressed, he became more domesticated, more civilized. He began to he began to distance himself from living flesh and began to focus more on, cooking meat. And it was satisfying for a while. In fact, he even lived among aristocracy for a bit with his companion Gwendolyn, who was, side note here, Gwendolyn was a serial killer who was also the daughter of a duke, and she actually envied the Vondrasul for being undead, much to his chagrin. Anyway, so being a domesticated undead werebear barbarian, the Vondrasul began to second-guess himself a lot. Whenever they would make a decision as a party that was obviously morally wrong, he would actually start to speak out a little bit more often. He began to develop as a character. And in this recent game that they are playing right now, actually, I believe we have a session tomorrow, they are essentially facing down the very necromancer who created him, who now has a goal to essentially destroy his home nation and turn it into an undead paradise. So now he is conflicted, because now he has to choose essentially, do I destroy this extremely powerful necromancer, the one responsible for so much death and destruction, or do I side with the people that labeled me initially as a monster and essentially turned their backs on me, dismissing me as an abomination? This kind of role-playing, this kind of character development, just any GMs out there who are not smiling right now, come on, this is exactly the kind of thing we want from our players, the kind of thing we want from our characters. We want to see our games not only influence their development, but also to have the player just jump full on into their character's development. Sure, some moments might be a little questionable, his motives might change from time to time, but you know what? That's just fine, because the end goal is all the same. It makes for a fantastic character, makes for a fantastic game, and every single time we sit down to play this adventure, I'm always smiling, and I'm always ready to see what the heck happens in this game, and boy howdy, am I excited for tomorrow, I'll say that much. This is actually a pretty small episode, but that's all I really have to say. These guys are my top 5 favorite player characters, and I hope that maybe in a year or two I might be able to change things up a little bit. You never know. With this game, whenever you're turning to the imaginations of a group of friends, anything can happen. And that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love this game, especially as a GM. So anyway, I guess I'll wrap it up here. Thank you all for listening. I have been Master Mimic, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Have a good one.